Hey everyone, ErikOnPaper here, and I'm Erik, and congratulations, we made it through 2020, so I'm excited to show off the first piece that I did in 2021. I put up a what would you like to see me draw on Instagram and got some great responses, as you can see here. And I decided to start off drawing the Hulk because he'd be an interesting challenge, and also pretty well encapsulated my mood going into 2021.
So this request comes from ZA_IN.712, and I had drawn the Hulk earlier, and he's a character I've actually struggled quite a bit with in terms of getting the over musculature right. I'm used to drawing more semi-realistic characters to extremely buff, but Hulk is meant to be a a mutation, of course, and you can see the shadow of it's a Captain America figure I actually used for perspective and reference. I actually don't have a Hulk figure for reference, so if anyone wants to send me one, I will not complain. But drawing the piece, I really wanted to capture the rage of the Hulk and also present him as powerful as possible, so therefore I wanted to look up at him, from a lower angle. And with that, though, I wanted the pose to complement the lower angle, and I thought, well, what if it was the point of view of, like, you're the bad guy that Hulk is proceeding to smash down on? When I had to add the shadows, and a viewer asked me a question about, well, where did I learn to shade? A lot of it is studying real life or studying, objects and photographs or artists you admire. In particular, I love the rendering work that Bernie Wrightson did on, especially on his Frankenstein book, but you might know him through his Swamp Thing work. Uh, People like him and Scott Williams are incredible inkers. And I was struggling with this drawing, so if you're looking at references, use yourself as a reference. Here's a photo I took, and obviously I copied the Hulk's muscles directly off of me. Look at that charming face of my inner child. So, anyway, when it comes time to inking, I that's when I usually fill in the bulk of the shadows and rendering. And I try to use a variety of tools to get this to work. I really like the way the quill works as per usual. Had an interesting problem though, in that I was getting the details that I really liked, but it was feeling a little bit weaker and less wild for my approach to the Hulk. And yes, my favorite Hulk is actually probably the Lou Ferrigno Hulk. Just in the way, just in the way he looks. In terms of realization, I grew up watching, I think, reruns on the Sci-Fi Channel, and I really liked the old show. From the modern Marvel movies, I tend to actually like the Hulk the most in the Ed Norton version. To me, he looks the most comic book influenced. I'm not disrespecting, of course, Mark Ruffalo or any other version. Well, maybe I will disrespect the Ang Lee version. But anyway, yeah, when it comes time to rendering shadows, I start to block in with the brush that I switch to the heavier shadows. Like if the light's coming from down below him, I wanted to have the densest shadows, of course, be the furthest away. But not liking how abruptly they ended, I like to taper and fade off my shadows. So what I then do is do a bunch of hatching and cross hatching to get uh, the shape of the object I want, like to round out a surface. Like his arms are basically cylinders. Uh, his pectorals are slightly modified cubes. You get the idea. And to suggest a gradation, of course, that's the level of hatching. I typically find one line is like the lightest rendering, a line with a cross, medium rendering, three lines. It just, of course, progresses when you get to black. as your darkest shadow. Now, I added a bunch of veins on his arms because they were looking a bit bare, and even in a really stylized way of drawing that I like to do, you still go for some kind of realism. And in filmmaking, when you're building a model or designing a spaceship, the industry term for that is taking the curse off. And what that means is if you have a broad surface that is flat or uninteresting, just adding some details, like the veins, for example, will make it pop. And the crotch area of the pants, of course, there wasn't much in the way of design elements there, so just threw on a lot of rendering lines, and it seemed to pick it up really well. Now, I thought I over rendered his face at first in comparison to the rest of his body, and I could have gone in and lightened up his face with whiteout, but it seemed more fun to me to just render out the rest of his body in that same heavy shading. So now going to colors, of course the Hulk's pretty easy to flat and color, he's green, but I wanted to show you a pretty interesting tip I picked up about color values. So right now I'm adding the highlights to the Hulk in the same hue as what I flatted him on. That's the base layer underneath. And to the average eye, it looks, it looks fine. You can definitely see highlights and pops and shapes like that coming together. But eventually, I will put this into black and white, and the goal is, if you're doing it right, you will see the color values pop even in black and white, because when these go to print, they're not nearly as vibrant as computer monitors, and you can spend all day calibrating it to the best of your abilities, and you're still going to get different results. But yeah, obviously, when coloring, uh, look for the highlights in the piece, just away from the shadows. And adding these veins allowed me to draw on these interesting light patterns on him and have his arms pop in a way that really you couldn't do if they were just drawn, say, more in a 60s style. And as much as I love just using the gradient tool to get that softer edge, slightly more realistic, and I know some people really don't like the airbrush look, but I do, and this is my piece. So, haha. Anyway, I found actually using the brush tool on this allowed me to get finer details and really help the edges pop. And if your piece is like what I did and extremely render it, you want your coloring to complement it, but at the same time, your color job shouldn't make the piece look muddy. You want it to be discernible and easy to read, even from a distance, because you have to think, if this is a piece you've commissioned for, like a client's commissioned you to draw, or say, oh, it's a cover you're illustrating, that has got to stand out amongst the other covers, or the other posters, or whatever. And I find drawing something simple but recognizable, even from a distance, helps. There, you can see me popping it into black and white. And what I noticed was that the hues were too similar. The image is still very gray. So I went in, and now I'm painting in black and white, but I went in with a much lighter green, and you can really see it pop. And when I was talking about keeping things from a distance, well, there you go. The image pops now much more greatly, and you're still keeping it in that green value. Like a piece like this where there's no, like, the discernible background, the background's more of an abstract. I'm going to just do a pattern on it later. You don't have to worry too much about reflected lighting or realistic rim lighting. It can be up to your imagination of whatever looks the best aesthetically. So it just went in, and now we can see that the Hulk's skin is popping, and occasionally I go a little too far with the highlights, so it's just a matter of scaling it back and forth. With these pants, they have to be a different texture than his skin. They have to be worn and rough and ripped. So I'm not worried about doing a smooth color fall off. Now the eyes, of course, are going to have to pop and sell the piece because it's what we communicate the most with emotion. So just go in there, add a bunch of like emerald or green lines or highlights. Hulk, I made his teeth yellow. Uh, Dr. Banner brushes, maybe the Hulk doesn't. I don't know, but it did make the piece, I feel, stand out more. And just a little bit of a highlight on his tongue for depth. Now, his hair, I had an interesting issue with, is that I did my usual method of coloring it in uh, all one color, and I looked, and it just looked weird. It looked way too bright. So what I went in is used another transfer mode, I believe it was called hard light, and just started to go in and draw darker streaks in the hair, and it helped tie it in together. Now just with the color I was messing around, I kind of initially liked the red look enveloping him, but I decided against it. So just pick a brush that you like, and I created this kind of strange pattern. Maybe it looks like fire crackles or something like that. In any case, it fit the kind of raging mood that I was thinking of for the Hulk. And overall, I still thought it needed some bit of rim light, so taking a cue a little bit from the background, I just used that orangey color to give him a little bit of a rim light, and I put that on a separate layer so that if I don't like it, I can just turn it off, no problem. And then I decided that the background was a little bit too bright and distracting, so I just went in and finally found what I liked to have it go into darkness, into a little bit too much darkness, so then I brought it back out, and here we see the Hulk.
Well, the Hulk was a lot of fun to draw. I learned a ton working on this piece, and what I'd like from you is well, ideally a like or subscribe if you haven't already. But I'd like to know what piece from the list you'd like to see me draw next. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention I was given an interesting art challenge. One of my viewers sent an email wanting me to draw the James Cameron version of Spider-Man had that film come out. I've been doing research on it, and I'll explain why it's a challenge when I get to that video. But just so you know, I haven't forgotten. And let me know what you want to see. I'll be happy to draw it. And keep telling your stories.